Hello, my name is Christoph Mauch and I'm the director of the Rachel Carson Center for Environment and Society here in Munich at Ludwig-Maximilians University. And it's my pleasure to welcome you for a discussion of what I think is a marvelous film, HOLGUT, that was just released by its director, Liesbeth De Ceulaer from Brussels. And we're lucky to have a group of panelists, very unique group of panelists, unique in many ways. First of all, because there's something you can't see. They are in very different places right now. One of them, Liesbeth herself, is in Brussels. Olga Trufanova is in Beijing, where it's 2 a.m. at night. And Elena Feditchkina Tracy is in Ottawa. Here in the studio, actually, which is a theater, there's Jan Sebening, one of the organizers of DOK.fest, and he is my co-moderator, so you have a chance to ask questions through the chat, and he will be involved in that as well. So after about half an hour, we will open the discussion to people beyond our little podium. Let me just say a few things. Liesbeth De Ceulaer has produced a number of films. The first one was about redwood forests in North America. The second one was also about North America. It was a film about Victoria. Well, Victoria doesn't exist as such, but a city in the desert in California. And this is her third film. It seems to me that what brings them together is sort of a pioneering spirit, a frontier, the horizon. She's somebody who comes from a city and from Belgium, and perhaps in Belgium, like in Germany, people are intrigued by American culture, and this is one of the things that seems to be a theme of her, the frontier, being in an empty landscape while you live in an urbanized country, but also fascination with forests. So her first film was about forests. Elena Feditchkina Tracy is also fascinated, if not obsessed, with forests. She did her doctorate in about forestry in many different continents. She worked for the World Wildlife Fund in Russia. She comes from Siberia, left Siberia at the age of 25, but when I talked to her a couple of days ago, I asked her, where are you now? She said, I'm in Ottawa, but I never really left Siberia. She has been in Siberia also as a journalist. She's a journalist, activist, scientist. And she did a film, actually she did 3 films in 2005 about another part of Siberia. So she brings a lot of knowledge and an interesting perspective to this discussion. And Olga Trufanova is mentored by one of the members of the Rachel Carson Center, Julia Herzberg, and she is, it says in the announcement, at the University of Regensburg, but she just told me she's never been to Regensburg, yet she is in Beijing, and I can't thank you enough for being with us, Olga, today. Olga is actually originally a historian. She comes also from Siberia, so we've got 2 Siberian natives, come from different parts of Siberia. Olga actually comes from Novosibirsk, and Olga is went to St. Petersburg, if I remember correctly, when she was 18 years old, studied history there, was interested in memory cultures, and then moved to Germany, to Berlin, and studied art history, got a second master, and now she's working on Siberian food history, has been working on that for a couple of years as a doctoral student. So we've got historian, art historian, activist, scientist, and a film director, and I'm so pleased to welcome you here. Let me ask one after the other. Maybe I ask Elena first, because I'm really intrigued. You both come from Siberia, but you come from different parts of Siberia. So maybe I could ask you what this film does to you emotionally. What is your reaction? What do you like about it?
Well, if you don't mind, I will just spend a little bit of time going through my emotions, like detailing them and trying to unfold them. I think there's so many good and fascinating things about this film, so I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about it. So first of all, it brings a lot of personal memories for me, actually, as a child who grew up in the Soviet Union. As one of the protagonists in this film, a scientist, Semyon, I was also exposed to this kind of scientific Soviet discourse about the mammoth. not only the cartoons, but there was lots of science done at the time. As a child, when I was 9 years old, we were taken with a group of children from Eastern Siberia on a trip to St. Petersburg, where we actually went to a museum of zoology. And we saw this the most famous baby mammoth in the Soviet Union was a mammoth Dima, Mamantyonok Dima. And it was in that museum, and we saw it was very intact little mammoth. And the story behind was that, okay, maybe one day they will somehow bring him back to life because he's looking so intact. So I clearly remember about this mammoth story, and it just stayed with me. I also, very emotionally speaking, what this film is really having, it has a stunning cinematography, like imagery, soundtrack, the pace of the film, the characters, it's great. The genre of the HOLGUT is defined as a hybrid. It combines the elements of fiction and documentary, right? So for me, this genre works really well. It's a new genre for me. I think it's a very delicate balance. There's a deliberate storyline, but also some, raw, unmediated moments of that reality, so I really like that. I think that for me, at least how I see the central theme of this film is about the wilderness. This place is existing somewhere at the edge of the world, Siberian permafrost in this case, and people going on a special quest or a journey, and they're traveling through those unique landscapes. So the film actually touches upon a universal mythology that is kind of shared by the whole humanity, So you can find the structure of this myth practically in all traditions. It's the idea of the rite of passage when a young person has to go into the wilderness to accomplish a certain task. So outcome is always transformative. The landscape usually plays a very important role for the personal transformation. But the film also has many other layers, right? Many themes, and really it's worth watching several times. When I watched it second time, I saw things that I didn't see when I watched it the first time. So the first one for me is an environmental activist is, of course, it's climate change. So it's right there. So it's very visible. The permafrost is melting. You cannot ignore it anymore. So the bones of the mammoths come from the ground. This is very surreal, but at the same time, it's very real. You see it, right? So in some ways, it's like a story from a scary Russian fairy tales. So scary, fascinating. The earth is revealing its ancient secrets. So the mammoths went extinct a long time ago, right? But it's also a story about the modern extinction. So wild reindeer, that is also the animals of the Siberian permafrost, now it's gone from its usual habitats. And so the hunter and the boy, those two other protagonists from the scientist, they cannot find large animals for hunting because the wild reindeer is gone. So the boy cannot complete his spiritual journey. He cannot complete his rite of passage, right? So we see in the film that the wild reindeer are moving further north, like mammoths in the past, and their population is rapidly declining, right? So one of the protagonists, the hunter, can no longer hunt because wild animals, most of them are all gone. So he says that he does not even remember what he did the last year because he lost the track of time. He doesn't go hunting anymore. So he's also losing his identity because of that. So I think this film is so powerful at this particular moment in time because we can all relate to its central theme, its metamorphosis. So collectively as a humanity, we experience a very rapid change which impacts on our daily practices now, our professions, and also our identity. Our lives are no longer the same. In some ways, we are not living the normal life anymore. Some of us cannot go to work, or we cannot do things we usually do due to the pandemic. Many people lost their livelihoods, their incomes, and their loved ones. So if we talk about the film, but also about our own experiences as viewers, you know, the pandemic has deep environmental causes as well. It's something to do with the shrinking habitats of wild animals, because diseases and viruses now can cross the boundaries between animals and humans. So we can really relate as viewers to the central theme of this movie. So the old myths and the old familiar rites of passages are no longer meaningful. You know, as a parent, I think about this almost every day. What my daughter's life is going to be like in this very rapidly changing world. Will younger generations have enough resilience to undergo this change without much help available from the old ways of doing things? Can they build their own strength and to find their own new identity and new meanings? I personally think that they can. And I believe that this film also somehow conveys this message of home. And I think it's done through the boy rather than through the scientists. But I think we can definitely debate this. So I would like to maybe ask these questions later on. So what is kind of the main message of hope for Liesbeth?
Mm-hmm. Well, wonderful statement and analysis. I wonder how Liesbeth sees this. It seems, I mean, it's a film, I find it very, very suggestive, a film that doesn't drive down a message. It's a film that's poetic and philosophical, and as you just mentioned, Elena, deeply human and something that we can relate to. And that's fascinating, that's so connotative. There's so many, it gives, I mean, you've, in these few minutes that you told us what your own experience was as a kid with mammoths, but also how you feel as a scientist or an activist today, it opens so many venues. And I'm wondering, Liesbeth, do you see yourself in some of these interpretations? What would your response be to Elena's question? And maybe perhaps even the question about hope. Is this a film of hope?
Yes, for me, it's a film of fears, of my own personal fears that I think I share with a lot of people, but then also hope in the end. And I think for me, it's also a personal thing, and I think films should not just portray an image of doom. I feel like we should find hope, but then as a filmmaker, of course, where to find this hope, that's a bit difficult. And it's true that well, thank you for this beautiful analysis of a film. When you make a film, you try to put a lot of things in it, and you accept the fact that some elements will get unnoticed. But it's always very nice to hear somebody who saw so much in the film. Thank you. And it's very true. Like for me, also the project, it started with me being fascinated by the idea of extinction, of animal extinction. And I very quickly found that the past 100 years, but also 1,000 years, that humankind had a very big hand in it. And that, as you already said in your talk, that it's always the biggest animals who seem to go. We see it in so many territories. We see it in Siberia. We see it in Australia. We even see it when the Europeans went to the Americas, and that the buffaloes were still the largest animals there, and they went to hunting competition, the shrinking of the land. So I was very fascinated about this story, but I didn't want to tell a story that was history. You know, I didn't want to say something about that happened, because I wanted us to think about ourselves and our own actions here and now, and not something, this just happened in the past. So that was one of the things that I went to look for, a story where extinction is in the making, actually. And another element that was very important for me was the climate change. And it's true what you said, that our daily lives are influenced. But of course, me living in Belgium, in Brussels, we are a bit shielded from these changes. So I wanted to go to a place where you could really see see the effects already, to really also maybe bring it back to where I live and say like, okay, there are really changes. So these are two pillars that were separately in me, but of course they connect very much. Animal extinction and climate change are very linked. And when I was doing research about these animal extinctions, of course, I came up with I found the story of the mammoth in Siberia, the mammoth extinction, which is very much the theory that it's a combination of climate change and humans having better hunting techniques. That was the extinction. And then now, but again, it's not just something in the past. Now through more heating of the temperatures, we have the melting of the permafrost, we have these tusks coming out. There's not only this climate change, but you see people do stuff with it. They go for the tusks, for the precious ivory there. You have scientists who try to clone or also try to study it, but also try to clone the mammoths to bring it back. And when I went to Siberia, one of the first times, I wanted to work more with tusk hunters. But it was actually coincidentally, while I was talking to tusk hunters, I was staying with with a family, because we went to a small village, Kazachi, and we were staying with a family. There's no hotel, so you have to be invited. And we were talking to a lot of people. And in the meantime, we were getting acquainted with these people in the house that we were staying with. And they had nothing to do with tusk hunting or mammoths, but they kept, also because of the language barrier, a lot went through our phone. So they kept showing me pictures of the tundra and of them picking berries, going hunting, all these things. And I got totally captivated by that. And I said like, okay, I also wanted to be about more than just the mammoth. I don't want to make a mammoth film. It's more about extinction. So that's when I found, by talking to them, like I found a story about the reindeer and that there's no more wild reindeer. So there, everything connected as well. Then to answer, and then, the third pillar, that was something that was important for me, is I was wondering, like, we tell our children stories about the past, fairy tales or myths or whatever, all these stories about the past, and it takes on mythical proportions. But I wanted to look at what is happening now. Like, what if somebody is telling the story about now to their child in 500 years or in 1,000 years? How would they? It's difficult to see what is happening at this moment. So that was one of the challenges. And when you talk about these topics, you have extinction, you have de-extinction. It's almost like coming back from the dead. You have the earth changing. You have these heroes. For example, the scientist who is really on a mission to go that. And I thought, okay, everything has such mythical proportions here. So let's take this opportunity actually to look at our current days as a myth. So those were the three pillars that I wanted. Of course, in my movie, I don't, like I've said before, I am not a scientist or I'm not an expert in all these different topics. And I also don't think that's my job. What my job is more, I'm not looking for definite answers, but more to raise a conversation, to add elements to go in a conversation. But then the story of hope, I think it was difficult for me because when we talk about climate change, global warming, it's something scary for me as a person. Like, how is my life going to be? How is the next generation going to live? So it was difficult to find hope, but I couldn't just make it a doom movie about it. And through cinematography, through images and sounds, I try to get a way out. Like also the boy. The movie, there's always the question being asked, what is our effect on animals and going extinct? But there's rarely the question, but what does this animal extinction does to our lives? Because to me, it seems like we have holes in our stories, like what you said, like these animals leave and how can we become full, you know, these are important elements that go away. So it was difficult for me to also find this hope in reality. And that's also why there was also fictionalizations for me, especially also the last part of the movie. It's like fictionalizations of the dreams of our protagonist. And for me also the last image of the boy, he finds kind of a solution in maybe a bit of an artificial world, but there are still ways out. And maybe his hunting of the reindeer didn't go as planned, but still he finds something else. So in this kind of way, I do try to bring a message of hope.
I think this is wonderful how the two of you speak to each other, and how both of you, well, how you've just explained now, Liesbeth, what you were setting out to do, and how some of the things that we were setting out to do evolved in a different way, and that the story took on its own, you know, dynamic, and there was an idea behind it. You wanted to see things evolve yourself. You want to see something, how climate change plays out. But the protagonists, who you didn't know in advance, were co-scripting the story, and you were scripting it. So you are both an artist and an ethnographer and a choreographer in this, but you couldn't know in advance at all how it would evolve. At this point, I'd just like to ask Olga to tell us her reaction of somebody who grew up in Novosibirsk, which is a different part of Siberia, of course, and who hasn't been, I think, to Yakutia. What does this film do to you, Olga?
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed watching this film, and it was very educational for me as well. Although, of course, yes, I come from Siberia, but still I come from a very urban part, from Novosibirsk, the third biggest city in Russia. And of course, there is only Russian spoken there. And this film really shows how vivid, how different and diverse Siberia is, how huge it is, even for a person born there. And it was amazing to watch a film in Yakutian language. I really liked it. That even the titles after the film, they were also written in Yakutian, which I really, really appreciated. And the music was also Yakutian, so it was really atmospheric in that sense. Speaking of the plot and of the motives, I think a lot of things that you have already mentioned also fascinated me. And the first being actually this relationship between the human beings and the dead animals, which is also paradoxical that dead animals have their own agency and can influence our life nowadays, even though they have been dead for a long time. And of course, this relation from human towards the animals is rather destructive, because it is this global warming theme, of course, which is very present. Extinction of animals, also through the global warming, but also through human hunting. And then all of a sudden, these dead animals come to rescue, like come to save the people. And I think this film, for me, it's divided into two big parts. The first part about the hunting of reindeer, and it's a bit desperate because they can't find them, and this is what constitutes their life, right? And it's right in the middle of this initiation process of becoming a man, and smaller brother cannot fulfill this role of becoming a man, just because the environment does not allow it to happen in that way. But finally, as a happy end to the first part, he finds this mammoth trunk and tusk, and then we see the whole second part, how this maybe task of man as a breadwinner changes from hunting the animals towards hunting dead animals. And this actually helps, right? Because I remember the phrase from the first part of the film that they say, I can't return home with empty hands, right? And the mammoth comes here as something which can still be a satisfactory result of their hunting. Yeah, this I found really interesting on how many layers it plays, but also there are other interplay of various layers in the film, which I found interesting. For example, the interchange between global and local. Also speaking of the climate change, we usually, we know that it's a global issue, but it's seen in certain regions of the world. And although I'm not environmental specialist or so, I'm quite interested in these subjects, but I think mainly what we learn about as examples of these immediate effects of the climate change come from the global south. And now we see the Nordic example of it, and this really touching scenes of the melting permafrost, that something goes really wrong and we can see it, we can touch it. Right. Another opposition which I found interesting was traditionalism and modernity, which is also maybe the relationship between the Yakutian culture, or also some elements of Russian culture, Russian words which they use for the words which maybe cannot be otherwise explained in a Yakutian language. Or there is a scene where they are sitting all together after the hunt, right, in the first part of the film, and you can see some Fanta drink staying on the table. Or there is this military uniform with a Russian flag on the sleeve, and that's all right because it's how it is. And this is also very authentic, and this mixture of cultures, of temporalities, it's just the way it is, which I found quite honest in this film. Right.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm just realizing while we are talking that there are 3 female panelists discussing a film that has only male protagonists. And I'm wondering, maybe Liesbeth, you could tell us a little bit about that. What was that a deliberate decision to only have male protagonists?
To only have male protagonists was not a deliberate decision, but it's rather a consequence of my time there also being limited, and also to have it's like you said, Semyon I met many years ago, and we had time to email and to talk about the film. But these 2 brothers I didn't meet in advance, also because my time was so limited. I had been to Kazachi, and I met this family in whose house we stayed, and I worked together with the man of that family. He was very fascinated by what we were doing, and we found out that he had an education in film in St. Petersburg when he was a young man, and so I had a very good connection with him. And I said, like, okay, can we work together? Normally he's a fisherman. He doesn't have anything to do with film, but I knew that he had a sensitivity and that he understood what we were doing. So when I left, and during that trip, I hadn't met Roman or Kim yet. And it was because I had such a good understanding. And when I was back in Brussels, we would be communicating through WhatsApp. So there was, with Google Translate as well. So there was a communication, but it was very minimal, but it was because this first encounter was so well. And so when I got back to Brussels, well, of course, there was a lot of time that go over it. We found the story of the reindeer, and then he found this man. He found Roman and Kim. When I went there, we started working. So I think that if I would have had much more time, if I would have been Yakutian or lived there, I think it would have been possible. But I had set up this story of extinction, of climate change, and there wasn't the freedom or the time to really look for maybe, let's say, a girl who's been taken. I mean, I would have found that interesting, but that would have been very difficult. Also there, women are not allowed to go fishing or hunting, for example. So the fact that I could join was actually a very big privilege. They looked at me as, it was never a problem, but they looked at me as a professional. as a filmmaker. That's what I was doing there, so I could join. But normally women are not allowed. I think also when I was with Semyon, the scientist, and we encountered these tusk hunters who go into the wilderness for a couple of months during the summer months. I don't think they had seen a woman in a very long time. But for me, it was never a problem. They understood the goal. As a woman, well, it's a choice I had to make. If I wanted to make this movie, if I wanted to tell this story about extinction, de-extinction, climate change, then that was the way it had to be. And it's more a consequence than that it's a deliberate choice. Yeah.
Maybe Olga has I gave Elena a chance to ask a question. Maybe Olga has a question too. I would also like you to maybe tell us a little bit before we forget it about because this is the DOK.fest and people are interested in technology and so on. Maybe you could also, while Olga is thinking about a question, maybe also tell us a little bit about the equipment, about your camera, who accompanied you, light, sound, but also it seems it's a relatively dark film. It looks like you didn't have big lights with you, and maybe you could tell us a little bit what your decision was. I mean, this is a summer film. You filmed it in the summer, where the sun doesn't set early, and yet it's a dark film. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about these decisions. I mean, it's tough to be there in the summer with the mosquitoes. We saw that, but it seems to have been a decision to produce a film that is relatively dark in the end, even though it's done in the summertime. Maybe you can combine that with the question of equipment, and maybe Olga has a question as well.
Right. Maybe
Shall
I can
answer,
just.
or?
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah.
First the answer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we go.
Me?
Yeah. Okay. Liesbeth goes first. Okay.
Well, I don't know. I'm okay. I'll answer. So the choice of filming in summer was also because I wanted to show. I have been to Kasachi, even in the north, in winter, and it was very hard. The temperatures reached -45 degrees Celsius, so it was very cold. It was beautiful. It's all white, all snow. It's really very beautiful. But I didn't want to show this beautiful winterland. It's a movie about climate change, and I wanted to see this abundance of water. Like, I wanted also to add that it's a movie about climate change, but actually almost never somebody talks about it. So I really wanted to make it visible. And that's, again, also a choice of not doing something informative of the past, but really experiencing it. So that was the choice of going in summer. I had this idea that I really wanted the viewer to feel like you could squeeze out like a sponge every image. Like, we also worked with sometimes water on the lens, for example, so that was a deliberate choice. Then I went from Belgium. We left with 3, so it was me as a director. Then there was one person who was both the producer and the sound person there, and then there was a cameraman. These are 2 colleagues that I've also worked with a lot in the past. So I knew if you go on an expedition, you need really to know people, and you can do this together and you can count on them. It's a fairly small team that we were, but it's also because of these difficulties, these logistic difficulties there. For example, when we went on the hunting trip with the 2 brothers, we were a group always of 3 boats. So there's the 2 brothers who have their boat with a camera and the cameraman and the soundman in there. Then we have a boat with me and equipment. We always had to bring a lot of food, tent equipment, but also big tons of fuel for the boat that we needed. And if we would have had more people, then we would have needed more boats, and everything would have exploded even more. So it was our choice to do it narrow, with a small team. The sound guy, he had a basic sound setup. He had a recorder. He had a pointed out microphone. He had these wireless microphones, and then we had like So that's more to capture the action and when people talk, footsteps, these things. But then he also had another microphone that really captured the atmosphere, because also during filming, also of my previous work, I knew that was something that I really wanted to work with. It's about this emerging into the nature. So there the sound can play a very big role. So that was something we did. And then the camera guy, we had a camera. It was a Ari Amira. It's a pretty good digital camera, but it's a documentary version. So where one person can operate this camera, he doesn't need somebody else. But it's a pretty good camera, because I was also looking to film. I wanted to show the wonder of this nature, the beauty of this nature, the sublime of the nature. It's not per se like an exotic view, but to show the gloriness of this nature. And I think we needed to have like a good, decent camera that made beautiful images with that. Mm-hmm. So that's about the equipment. Was there another part?
And I think then I'd also like to make a suggestion. Maybe Olga asks a question, and then Elena asks a question, and then we open it up to the questions that have come out of the chat. There are some questions, and then we go back to our panel. So this is totally interesting. I have so many questions I don't want to ask anymore, because Olga and Elena should have a chance too.
Yes, thank you. I actually have many questions, and maybe a general one will be just how was it to make this film, and how long did it take you? And I'm curious to know basically any detail, but now that I was listening to you, I came up with particular aspects which would interest me. My research is about the history of food in the colonization of Siberia in the 17th and 18th century, and I was wondering, what did you eat while you were there, and how was it different? Or maybe there was something you missed or something that you tried for the first time. Yeah, and the second question, a small aspect of it is, do you feel more like participant or more as an observer? Yeah, that's it.
Okay. All right, the food question. We ate a lot of fish and reindeer. When we filmed in Yakutsk a bit, and then we went on a long expedition before returning back to Yakutsk. First, we filmed with the scientist, and the first part we were still in a town called Batagayka, so we just had a place there where we could eat. It wasn't that special. But then when we went to our second place, we took a boat ride for 6 hours, and there we camped on the shores. And the scientist was with us, but there was also a boatsman, and also this boatsman, he also they went to, while we were filming, they went to catch fish. And when we came back, we had mostly like a fish soup to eat, and it was very delicious. I don't know exactly which fish it was. When we communicated, they said riba. So that's very generic, I guess. But so a lot of, during that expedition, it was fish soup. Another nice element was that Semyon, the scientist, he had been to that place like a week before with another film crew. And with that film crew, he still had quite some bread left over. So he hid that. And when we came back, it was like this very dark, brown, black bread. When we came back, it was still good. And we finished the bread from there. Our Belgium team, we were a bit afraid of the water situation because they drink water from the river. And we were like, okay, shall we take this risk? We had some filters, but it took a very long time to filter the water. And then at a certain point, like the cook, he says to us, guys, you've been drinking water from the river already for a couple of days, so I think it's fine. So from that moment on, when we were on the boats in the middle of the river, we filled our bottles with water from the river. For the second part with the brothers, there was there was fish. We ate a lot of fish. We ate the duck that is hunted in the film that we also ate. But for them also very important is reindeer. And when I was on a research trip there, it was during winter, they let us taste these specialties, which was quite special. Like one was a frozen reindeer liver very dark in color. And when it was frozen, it was still okay to eat, but after a while it melted a bit. My assistant at that moment, she was vegetarian, but she already said in the beginning, like, look, we go there, this has nothing to do with this, how we treat cows and pigs and chicken here. So she ate it, but it was very strong. We also had reindeer tongue, which was also, I mean, I'm very happy that I tasted it, but it was a challenge. And they made a lot of pastries with reindeer meat in it. And we also had this, but I think they have this in the whole of Siberia, these very thin slices of fish, frozen fish. You put it in a bit of salt, and so that's what we ate here. When we went to the reindeer herders, when we ate with them, we were already on an expedition for quite a while, and there was a reindeer soup that they made, like just boiled water. And they are quite isolated. They can go get food, but they're still quite isolated. And with that soup, I remember, like, oh, when you had just a piece of onion, you were already happy to have some vitamins in there. Yeah, so that's what we ate. But we always had locals that we worked with who are not like professional caterers, but they always took very good care of us. So then they always did their best, and we had enough food. Yeah, that was
interesting
nice
question and fascinating.
Yeah. Excuse me?
No. I just said interesting question and fascinating answer, and. Maybe Elena
and
can...
second question, what? Yeah. Oh, there was a second part of the question.
The second part was about you being a participant or rather an observer, but I think it's already getting sort of obvious that, of course, you were a participant, but you're, of course, the one who was watching it as an outsider. So what was the proportion?
Well, I always see myself kind of like a coach of a team, because you work so close that people... It's a docu-fiction, it's hybrid, so they act in a way, but they are not professional actors, and that's also not what I expect them to be. So if they really are in a scene, it must be that they believe in it, and that they understand everything, and that we're on the same line. Like sometimes in advance I had a lot of propositions, like we can go do this, we can go do that, but they always had the possibility to say, like, no, that's not how we would do it, or that's not something I would say. Roman, the older brother, he said that a couple of times. That's not how I was like, okay, then we look together. So what could you say? Because that's the idea behind it, you know? And then we look together. So I see it more like as a coach who has a vision, who has a plan, but then together with these players, actually, we make the whole project. Yeah.
So Elena, I'm sure you have a question too, and then we move to the other audience.
Yes, I have a question. Actually, I have several questions. I'm just thinking what should be not a very long question, maybe. You know, actually, I was intrigued by one of the last remaining scenes in the film about these tunnels, you know, that they went to, the Simeon scientist went into some tunnel. And I was trying to understand what was there, like what was the tunnel? Because it wasn't clear, and then he started, you know, tasting some almost like a meat of a mammoth or something like that. But the tunnel itself looked like some sort of maybe abandoned Soviet structure. Like, can you just tell me a little bit more? Like, I know I'm just intrigued by that particular scene. What was there actually in those tunnels?
Okay, the fictionalization, it's built up gradually. In the beginning, there's like these little fictionalizations. Halfway, there's some more, and then at the end, we really go full in. And to both Kim and Semyon, we thought about it as a sort of a permafrost dream. At the end, we also follow Semyon, who gets very close to finding a mammoth. We follow him in, and then what happens afterwards? It's dream. There's a dream logic. So that was very fictionalized in where we found these tunnels. They're separated elements that got combined together. For example, the tunnel specifically, it's a permafrost museum. And you can go down, and that's where these tunnels are. And they are making experiments on how different things react in permafrost. or but we used it as a setting for the film. You know, it's just a setting. When he eats the meat, what you see, it's based on something that he did in the past. Well, he tasted. Semyon, in the movie, he tells that he found this carcass in the past, that he found a carcass and that it was very fresh and that the carcass still had liquid blood coming out. So he found this and he was there right with as close as a human being can get to a mammoth in these days. And that's when he tasted the mammoth. It's a known story that he did. So he saw this meat that still looked so fresh. It was red meat, you know, it wasn't old. And well, it was old, but it didn't look like that. So he had a little taste of that. And for me, the meaning of that, we talked about it, that you also see it in other documentaries, but I didn't want to sensationalize it like, oh, look at how crazy this is. But for me, it was a very beautiful thing because you have this one human being, Semyon, who loves these mammoths and who misses the mammoth, like he wants to bring them back. And at that moment, he becomes the only human being that has been so close to this animal. And that's what I wanted to portray with that shot. Like, I think at the end, we already spoke also about the boy who is in the artificial landscape. All these different shots had like a symbolic or a poetic meaning, and they are combined in what we called a permafrost dream.
Okay, so I think, Jan, we are ready to get some questions from the internet.
Yes, we have questions from the viewers, and the first one goes to Liesbeth, and someone goes by the name of Guest said that she was very touched by the legend of HOLGUT, the mammoths, which opens your film, and she is curious, how did you learn about it?
Yeah, it's very interesting because, like Olga already said, the main language of the film is Sakha, Yakutian, but the legend at the beginning of the movie, it's not Yakutian, it's Yukagir, and it's also, well, Yukagir are people who live all up north in Yakutia. They're also very much related to the reindeer herding. And there's not that many people still living up there, and also the language. It's only, it was less than 50 people still speak this language. And I had the privilege to meet a man who knew a lot about this culture, and he told me the story of HOLGUT. And for me, like, one of the things that I wanted to explore in the movie was this idea of myths. Is it something in the past, or is it something that keeps evolving? Because in that myth you have HOLGUT, the mammoth, but you also have it's actually influenced by Christian mythology, because it's a combination of the story about this mammoth and the flood and Noah building his ark, but then it's transported to Yakutia and to their culture. So he makes a raft. So I was immediately fascinated by this mythology, and also the line of the myths in the movie is in this movie we see, okay, the mammoth gets lost, and the rest of the mythology is people trying to find him again. So that's why we started with it. And I also really wanted to have the idea of also a language going extinct, maybe be revived, let's hope so, but that it's not just these animals, that it's things coming and going, this creation of past, present and future in the same moment. I also found that in that one story.
There's another question also for Liesbeth once again. And this is Edda writes us how impressed she was by your poetic approach in the film to a subject that is actually also scientific. How did it came about, and was that clear from the beginning, or did that evolve?
Is it specifically about cloning, or just in general, maybe?
Yeah, the balance between your poetic approach and the subject being essentially scientific.
Okay. Well, when I was reading about the cloning part and also about this extinction, de-extinction, I saw, for me, it was like poetry. I am also in my previous works, I am very much fascinated about to see a poetic layer in there. It's just like science is also, it's if you think about the ethical parts or what they are really doing, it is poetry. I mean, if we talk about de-extinction, it's bringing back these animals from the dead. So for me, it's just, I think also science and the scientific world, it's sometimes a world difficult to enter and to understand and to see. And I would like to see myself as a person who is in between scientists and an audience to kind of bring it in a certain way. And then I think looking at it as with a poetic view is a good way to do that. Yeah.
There's actually also a question for Olga. We see only a fraction of the lives of the two boys, and our audience wonders, as you know the country well, how is the life for the youth over there, Olga? What should I need to know?
It's a good question because, as I have already said, I have never been to the north, but I can only judge from anthropological works which I have read or so. And actually, as I have also written about the film, and Liesbeth can correct me there, that a lot of people migrate to cities to find some job, and they don't lead this traditional lifestyle. And I think what we saw in the first part about the two brothers, it's well, I hope it's not a rarity, but it can look very different for the people living up in the north. There are also cities, well, not very far in the north, but maybe in the middle of Russia, and life does not look that different as in other European cities, maybe with just the difference that the cities are much smaller and the infrastructure is not that developed. But I think Liesbeth can tell more about the people she met in the landscapes which we saw in the films, but my answer would probably be that it is just the part of that reality of Siberia, or better say the northern part of Siberia, and a big part would be also urban life with people going to jobs and earning money and not hunting reindeer.
And of course we have more questions for Liesbeth, and this is Marlie who writes us and suggests that you answer Liesbeth in a poetic way of thinking. She asked Liesbeth, do you think that man can influence nature in a good way? Can man also inscribe things in nature?
Yes, I think man can. This is just my personal view. I think man can, and I think we have reached to this point that the influence of man is everywhere, especially also due to climate change now. It's literally everywhere, and it would be nice to think of the world as a wild place, but it's not anymore. And if we want best for nature, for fauna, flora, I think we should interfere where the levels are. I cannot say in which extent go, but I think we should see that the actions we do have an influence on nature, whether we want it or not, and it becomes more and more clear. It's in Yakutia you have, well, in Siberia in the north you have this abundance of water. On the other hand, you have all these wildfires in Australia and in California. So it's everywhere, and I think it's our job to interfere if we want animals and fauna to survive. I think it's just the reality that we live in now, and I can close my eyes and think of a beautiful wild world, but if we are in reality, I think we should try our best to help. And there are beautiful examples, like you already said, that my first movie was in the Redwoods, and for example, it's a small example, but controlled fires is a great way of making sure that an interference of humankind. So they make these fires so that they're controlled and the fires are contained, so that after 20 years of buildup, otherwise there's not a huge fire. So it's these little things that I think we should do. And maybe also, of course, a zoo or nature areas, nature parks, for example. It's not this idea of wild, but I think it's the best way of preserving nature, or even trying to help come back nature in certain places. Yeah.
Maybe I could ask a question that goes first to Elena, because we heard from you, Liesbeth, that this is all Judeo-Christian myth in part that was then adopted and paganized, if you will, and got a new life. And I'd like to get a little bit more into the minds of the people. What role does religion play, cosmology? We saw all these little drawings that were really creation myths. And so maybe I'd like to ask you in a way so that everybody can respond, but first perhaps Elena, who has done many interviews with people in Siberia and has lived with them in part. So the first question would be about, what role does religion play in Siberia with these people? But then I'm also intrigued by the fact that, Elena was in that area at an earlier point. Now everybody in the world is talking about permafrost. To what extent is this a topic today in 2018 when Liesbeth was there? People actually talking about that. Maybe you can, all of you, give us a little bit, get into the mind of the people, what their concerns are, both in terms of the more broad and religious and philosophical questions, but also the concrete fears they have. Maybe Elena can start, and then Liesbeth and Olga.
Yes, so that's a good question. So Liesbeth already answered a little bit. So the beginning of the film, she takes this myth from the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? So the saving the animals from the flood. But then she adds something to it, right? So the mammoth couldn't get on because he was too big. And then, that's how he kind of falls through the cracks and disappears. But in the end of the film, there is actually another myth that the boy tells, that the boy is involved in the myth-taking right now, so myth-making. So the big mammoth is emerging from the ground, and he leaves a huge hole in the ground. And so a man and a boy, or a father and a son, falls into that hole, right? So, and that sounds like a new myth just emerged, that he makes this new myth. And so that sounds a little bit kind of a dark, not very Christian maybe. The tradition that, this indigenous peoples of Yakutia, there's several, and Liesbeth mentioned several already, like the Yakagirs, there's Yakuts, there's Ivanks of the north. They're actually known for practicing shamanism. And apparently there is still still there are some people who are shamans there. So the tradition is a little bit still alive. And I was actually wondering if Liesbeth came across, they must be talking about a lot of practices that are still kind of conveying some of the cosmology, right? So that consists of several, I believe it's 9 levels. The world consists of 9 levels. And so every being has their own layer or own level where they actually occupy that cosmology. And so the animals live there and the humans live here, and mammoths probably live somewhere else at the kind of a ground level of the existence. And so I was just wondering, actually, Liesbeth, if you came across some of those kind of experiences or practices that they still practice very much, I think, in the North. Have you?
Well, I haven't. I cannot talk about general Yakutian culture, but the encounters that I had and the people that I worked with, and you also see it a bit in the film when the older brother says before they go on their trip, like, okay, we give an offering to the gods, and these things were very, very present. Every time we took a boat, we offered something to the river, for example. So it's a sort of an animism that you believe that every natural being or phenomenon, like also the river, is a spirit. The river is Yana, it's a spirit. So you offer to it, and it was very much incorporated in their daily lives. For example, Roman, he was riding his boat, and he would light a cigarette and he would give one to the river, or he would have something to eat and he would give something to eat just while he's driving. So it was very much in their day-to-day life. With Semyon also, like, it's true that mammoths, they live underground in these different levels. I don't know exactly which level, but it's underground. And when they, as an honoring to when humans take something out, they always give something back, and it can be beads, it can be food, it can be cigarettes, it can be drinks. You know, they always give something back, and so that was still very much incorporated. Like, they have their jobs, their tasks, and their modern jobs, you know, but still that is in the back of their minds. Yeah.
Maybe I can just add to the religious question, if I may, because I found it really fascinating, and I celebrated this moment when there is the scene of the offering to the spirit of the moon. And it's amazing that there have been efforts to Christianize Siberia for now about 400 years at least, right? And they, as we see, they did not completely succeed, and it's a very beautiful perseverance or remaining of these cosmologies, and still there are also the mixtures, as already been mentioned, about these HOLGUT myths. And I think also back in times, the travelers or ethnographers in the 18th century, they already found some mixtures of these ideas from Christianity and local religions. And yeah, this mixture I find really beautiful in the film and in general in Siberian cultures.
Well, we have basically reached the end of our 1 hour discussion, but I'd like to ask you one final question that you, if you feel like it, should answer. I'm wondering, if you have one wish for Yakutia, what would it be? Where should it be heading in the future?
Oh, that's difficult for me to say. I wish like it's also what you just said now with these beliefs and this to preserve what they have, like the way that they look at the world. It's the wilderness in itself, but also to this look at the world. If you're there for a long time and you look at the landscape, it becomes magical. It's beautiful already out of itself. But that this mythical look at the landscape, I wish for them to preserve as well as possible this look at the world. Yeah.
Olga and Elena, do you want to add something?
Yes, you know, Yakutia is a special place, not only for the landscapes, but also for the cultures, for the indigenous cultures. They're very strong there. You know, they haven't really lost them. And for the indigenous governance, this is the only region in Russia that have actually ethnographic environmental impact assessment implemented. So when they have a project like constructing a pipeline, like in theory, they still need to ask the local indigenous people. So the bottom line, the indigenous cultures are still very strong there. So my wish is that they keep it and not to surround it to this kind of movement of, you know, mineral explorations, pipelines and all those things. So just keep what you have. Your true treasure is this culture. You know.
Yeah.
Probably the same would be for me as well. Although, yes, there is this northern way, right, due to the melting of the Arctic ice, and the infrastructure can change probably and new ways appear, but still I really wish that all these cultures preserve, and maybe that we can, or not maybe, I'm sure we can learn a great deal of this fine balance that is implicit in their cultures between humans and nature, and taking from the nature means that you need to give something back to it, an offering or something else.
Liesbeth, Elena and Olga, I thought this was a wonderful discussion. I cannot thank you enough for, Olga staying up that late at 3 o'clock at night, and all of you for enlightening us in a very special way. I think this has been a very special discussion, and it brought together so many diverse things, from frozen reindeer liver to the end of the world apocalypse and the founding of the earth. And so I think that the reason why it brought so many things together and these discussions went in so many different and fascinating and haunting and at the same time beautiful directions is the film itself. And that has triggered and will trigger many provocations in the future. So just thank you so much to the three of you.
Thank you.